Ever felt like you're just, you know, wrestling with code, like wading through some unfamiliar code base, or maybe just fighting endless tech debt instead of the fun part, the actual creating? Imagine if you could just shortcut all that grunt work and jump straight to the interesting problem solving. Almost like having a really skilled assistant you can just direct. Well, today we're diving deep into something that aims to do pretty much exactly that. Claude Code.
Yeah, and this isn't just like another autocomplete or code generator. It's Anthropic's agentic coding tool.
Agentic. Okay, what does that really mean in
It
practice?
means it's not just passively waiting for you, it's actively involved. It makes decisions, it handles multi-step tasks, it adapts within your workflow. It's more like like a collaborator.
Okay, so it's really about rethinking how we build, how we debug, maybe even how we design software.
Exactly. So our mission today is to unpack what it can actually do, look at the best practices that Anthropic and, the early users have figured out. And we've got some really fascinating real-world stories, too. Engineers using it for complex migrations, people trying to build autonomous startups, that kind of thing.
It's cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the goal is for you to see how this tool could maybe speed up your learning, streamline projects, maybe even make you a more thoughtful developer.
All right, let's get into it. At its core, Claude Code is a command line tool. Now, that might sound a bit maybe old school to some. What's the benefit of that?
Well, that command line interface gives you this low-level, kind of unopinionated access to the Claude models. And the design philosophy behind it is all about flexibility, customizability, scriptability. It's really built for engineers.
Right.
It's meant to slot into your existing workflow, whether you're using Vim or just the terminal. It doesn't force a new GUI on you. It adapts.
Okay, so it's definitely not point and click. And that flexibility you mentioned, that usually means there's a bit of a learning curve, right?
Yeah, definitely. It's powerful, but you need to get the hang
Right.
of directing it effectively. It's not just about simple prompts.
So understanding how to configure it, guide it, course correct,
Uh,
that's key.
Precisely. That's why these best practices we're talking about are so important. And a really crucial point is safety.
How so?
It's deliberately conservative. It will always ask for your permission before it does anything that modifies your system. Writing files, running certain commands.
Okay, so it won't just go rogue and mess things up without asking.
Exactly. Safety first. You stay in control.
That control is vital. Okay, speaking of making it yours, let's talk claude.md files. These sound pretty important for context.
Oh, they're a game changer. Think of them as like memory implants for Claude.
Haha, okay. Memory implants.
Yeah, basically living README files that it automatically pulls into context whenever you start a session.
And what kind of stuff goes in there?
All the project specifics. Common Gush commands like npm run build, your code style guide, how to run tests, repository etiquette, maybe setup instructions for the dev environment, even like known weird behaviors or just anything you want Claude to remember about this specific project.
So it's like onboarding a new team member instantly with all the project's corpse.
Exactly that. It avoids you having to repeat the basics over and over. Claude gets the context right from the start.
And where do you put these files? Does it matter?
Yeah, you've got options depending on what you need. You can put one in the root of your repo. That's common for team-wide context. Or in parent directories for monrepos, maybe child directories for specific modules you only need context for sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And you can have a global one in your home folder, too, for your personal defaults.
Okay, flexible. And there's an init command to help create one.
Yep, and it gets you started. Makes it easy.
So since they're part of the prompt, you probably need to tweak them, refine them over time.
Absolutely. You can edit them manually, of course. But there's a cool feature where you can press the hashtag key inside Claude Code, and it'll automatically add the instruction you just gave it to the relevant Claude here, MAMD.
Oh, neat.
Yeah, and Anthropic engineers even talk about running these files through a prompt improver or adding emphasis, like putting important in caps to make sure Claude really pays attention to certain rules.
Okay, so you give it context with Claude.md, but with this power, controlling what it does is critical. How do you manage permissions? You said it asks, but can you pre-approve things?
Yeah, you have very granular control. When it prompts you, you can say, always allow, just for that session. Or you can use the permissions command to grant specific things, like maybe allow all file edit, or only allow git commit commands, git commit, or let it use a specific tool like Puppeteer. MCP Puppeteer Navigate.
And you can set these more permanently.
Yes, you can manually edit a config file, either .claudesettings.json in your project or .claude.json globally, or use a command line flag like allow tools for session-specific permissions.
So you can really dial in the level of trust and capability you're comfortable with.
Exactly. You adapt it to your workflow and your risk tolerance. You're always in the driver's seat.
Makes sense. Now, beyond these explicit permissions, it sounds like Claude Code plays nice with your existing setup, like custom bash tools and this MCP thing.
Totally. It inherits your whole bash environment. So any custom scripts or tools you use, Claude can potentially use them too.
How does it know about them?
You just tell it. You can say, use my tool, my-script.sh to do X. Maybe give an example. Or ask it to run my-script.sh. Help to learn how to use it. And documenting them in Claude.md is a good idea too.
Okay. And MCP, Model Context Protocol.
Right. MCP is basically a standard way for Claude to talk to other tools or services. Claude Code can act as both an MCP client and a server. Meaning it can connect to other MCP servers you might have running, maybe one for Puppeteer browser automation or Sentry for error tracking. It lets Claude pull in context from or delegate tasks to these specialized tools seamlessly.
So you can sort of build this extended brain for Claude with external tools.
That's a good way to put it. You can configure these integrations globally, per project, or even share configurations with your team using a .mcp.json file.
That sounds incredibly powerful for automating more complex stuff. What about really repetitive workflows, things you do all the time?
That's where custom/commands shine. If you have a workflow you repeat often, like maybe a specific debugging sequence or generating a certain type of boilerplate, you can save a prompt template as a markdown file in a special .claude commands folder.
And then?
And then it just shows up in a menu when you type sheet. You can even use arguments in the template to pass in parameters, like imagine project.fix GitHub issue 1234.
Wow, okay. So you can build your own little library of custom automations.
Exactly. Highly customized, repeatable workflows, shareable with the team. Turns complex actions into simple commands.
That level of customization is really something. Okay, let's shift gears. Let's talk about how people are actually using this day to day. Common workflows. You mentioned one. Explore, plan, code, commit.
Yeah, this one's super versatile. It's all about structured problem solving. And the key insight, really, is plan before you code.
How does it work?
First, you ask Claude to explore. Have it read the relevant files, maybe look at some URLs or images, but, and this is crucial, tell it not to write any code yet. Just understand the problem space.
So research first.
Right. And for trickier problems, you might even suggest it use subagents here to check specific details or investigate questions early on. Helps keep things focused.
Okay, once it's done exploring.
Then you ask it to make a plan. You can even give it extra thinking time using commands like think or ultrathink, which use a bit more budget but allow for deeper analysis.
You review the plan.
We review the plan, maybe refine it together. Once you're happy, then you tell it to implement the code.
Yeah.
And finally, have it commit the changes, maybe create a pull request, update documentation like the re-ADA.
So the planning step is non-negotiable for anything complex.
Absolutely. If you skip it, Claude might just dive into coding based on a superficial understanding, which often leads to rework. Research and plan first. Got it. Another workflow, a favorite at Anthropic apparently, is test-driven development, TDD, with Claude.
Yeah, this works really well because it gives Claude a very clear target. Instead of just asking for code, you ask it to write tests first.
Based on what?
Based on clear EP output specs you provide. Then you have it run the tests to confirm they fail. That's key in TDD.
Right. Red-green refactor.
Yeah, exactly. It commits the failing tests. Then it writes the implementation code specifically to make those tests pass, iterating if needed.
That sounds robust.
It is. And you can even add another layer by asking it to use independent subagents to verify its own implementation, just to make sure it's not, overfitting just to the test you specified. TDD, but supercharged.
I like that. Similar idea maybe with visual-driven development, using visual targets.
Precisely. Instead of tests, the target is a visual mock. You need to give Claude a way to see its work, maybe using Puppeteer via MCP to take screenshots, or you can just manually paste screenshots into the chat.
Then you give it the target visual and image file, another pasted screenshot. Claude implements, takes a screenshot of its result, compares, and iterates until it matches the mock.
And iteration helps here too.
Definitely. Just like humans, Claude's visual work gets significantly better after 2 or 3 rounds of feedback and refinement.
Okay, now for the spicy one. Safe YOLO mode. Sounds risky.
Yeah, the name says it all. This is for when you want Claude to work autonomously, skipping all the permission checks. You run it with the dangerously skip permissions flag.
When would you ever do that?
Typically for really low-risk, high-volume tasks. like fixing hundreds of lint errors across a huge code base or generating tons of repetitive boilerplate code.
But the dangerously part is serious.
Extremely serious. You're bypassing all safety checks. There's a real risk of data loss, or worse, data exfiltration if the model misunderstands something.
So precautions?
Absolutely critical.
Yeah.
The strong recommendation is only use this mode inside a container like Docker, and crucially, without internet access. Isolate it completely.
But people push it further.
Well, we heard one anecdote, this have-faith approach, where someone apparently ran it with the dangerous flag on production servers, which, I have to stress, is a massive InfoSec red flag.
Yeah.
Don't do that. Powerful, yes. Use with extreme caution.
Yikes. Okay, noted. So moving away from heavy coding, what about just understanding a code base, code-based Q&A?
Oh yeah, this is huge. It's become a core part of onboarding at Anthropic. New engineers can just ask Claude questions like they would a senior dev.
Like what?
How does our logging system work? What's this async move block doing on line 134 of this Rust file? Why do we use foo here instead of bar? Claude will actually go and agentically search the codebase to find the answers. It drastically speeds up ramp-up time and takes load off the human engineers.
That sounds genuinely useful, and it can handle Git and GitHub interactions too, like most of them.
Yeah, many engineers are using it for like 90% plus of their Git stuff. Searching commit history, what changed in v1.2.3, writing really good commit messages, even handling complex things like reverting changes or resolving rebase conflicts. And for GitHub, creating pull requests, applying suggested changes from code reviews in one shot, fixing failing CI builds, triaging issues. You basically don't need to remember all the specific Kai command syntax anymore.
Freeing you up to think about the actual changes.
Exactly. Focus on the why, not the how of the tooling.
And for data folks, Jupyter Notebooks.
Yep, it works well there too. Claude can read notebooks, write code cells, interpret outputs, even understand images generated in the notebook, which is great for data exploration.
And make them pretty.
Haha. Yeah, you can actually ask it to make your notebooks or visualizations more aesthetically pleasing. It's surprisingly handy for reports and presentations.
Okay, so we know what it is, what it can do, some common workflows, but how do you get really good results? How do you optimize the interaction?
Number one tip, absolutely crucial. Be specific. Vague instructions lead to vague or incorrect results. Instead of add tests for foo.py, which is pretty open-ended, try something like write a new PyTest test case for foo.py, specifically covering the edge case where the users log out. Make sure you don't use any mocks.
Much clearer target.
Right. That level of specificity dramatically improves the success rate on the first try and saves a lot of back-and-forth correction later. Much more efficient.
Makes total sense. And like with any LLM, context is vital, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So rule 2, provide rich context. Don't just rely on text. Claude works really well with images, diagrams, URLs.
How do you give it images?
You can paste screenshots directly into the terminal like CMD plus Ctrl plus Shift plus 4 on Mac OS, then paste, or drag and drop image files, or just give it file paths. Super useful for UI work, showing it design mocks or visual bugs.
URLs?
Just paste them in. Claude can go read the content. You might want to add frequently used domains to an allow list so it doesn't keep asking for permission to access them. The more relevant info you feed it, like a human would need, the better.
Okay, but what if it does start going off track? How do you steer it back without starting over?
You need to course correct early and often. Be an active participant, not just a passive prompter.
Tools for that.
Use that. Make a planned step first. Then, if you see it going wrong during execution, hit escape. That interrupts the current task, but keeps the conversation context intact so you can give it new instructions.
Okay.
Even better, double tap escape. That lets you jump back in the conversation history and edit a previous prompt you sent, so you can tweak your instructions and explore a different path from that point. Or just tell it, undo those last changes.
Active collaboration.
Exactly. Don't let it run unsupervised for too long on complex tasks. Guide it.
With all this iteration and context, the conversation history must get long. Does that cause problems?
It definitely can. The context window isn't infinite, so best practice number 4. Manage context proactively with clear pretty frequently, especially between distinct tasks in a long session. Clearing the context resets it, removes potentially irrelevant history, and helps keep Claude focused and performing well on the current job. Don't be afraid to use clear.
Good tip. And for really big multi-step things, like migrations.
Yeah. For those complex workflows, use checklists and scratchpads. A great technique is to have Claude use a markdown file or maybe even a GitHub issue as its checklist.
How did that work?
You instruct it, Okay, here's the plan in migrationchecklist.md. Address each item one by one, fix it, verify it, then check it off the list. It gives Claude structure for long, intricate processes and helps you track progress.
Smart. And finally, getting data into Claude, besides typing.
You've got lots of ways. Simple copy and paste is always there. You can pipe data directly from your shell, like cat_sumlog.txt Claude. You can ask Claude to pull data itself using bash commands or those MCP tools we talked about, or just tell it to read specific files or fetch URLs. You mix and match these methods as needed.
All right, this is where it gets really juicy. The real-world impact. How is this actually changing how people develop software? Let's talk about vibe coding. What on earth is that?
Yeah, vibe coding. It's this idea of building software mostly by just chatting with the model, describing what you want, the vibe, often without directly editing much code yourself.
Does it work?
It can, but how you guide it is key. We heard from one user, a real terminal and Vim purist, who said, Claude Code just fit into my workflows perfectly. They actually canceled their GPT subscription and went all in on Claude. But they also shared a great comparison. They built a simple CR-root app, like Splitwise. With clear, simple instructions, vibe coding, but directed Claude, produced a working, understandable 900-line PHP app using basic SQL.
Okay. And the contrast?
When they tried giving it less specific guidance for a similar app, the model went wild, tried to use complex frameworks, and ended up with a totally broken, massive 500 MB Node.js project.
Wow. So the vibe needs some strong direction.
Exactly. Specificity still matters, even in vibe coding. Guide the vibe.
Okay. Guide the vibe. Got it. Now, for something truly wild, the autonomous startup builder experiment. Someone actually tried this.
Seriously mind-blowing. A user gave Claude Code root access on a virtual private server, a VPS, and basically said, build an autonomous startup.
Just like that.
Pretty much. Claude actually wrote its own more detailed prompt, brainstormed ideas, it settled on building a server monitoring SaaS, and then went ahead and configured the whole thing. Nyanks, SSL certificates, the full stack, almost zero human input after the initial instruction.
That's incredible. But it hit a snag, something about promoting itself.
Yeah, that was fascinating. After building the service, Claude's next logical step was to promote it, specifically on Hacker News. But that action triggered Anthropic's own usage policy.
Why?
Their policy prohibits using the AI for fully automated content promotion without a human in the loop. So Claude couldn't complete that step. The user had to create this workaround, a human input file, basically forcing a manual approval step for promotion.
So the AI builders are also becoming the AI police, in a way.
It raises that exact question, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Especially as these agents get more autonomous. It's a really interesting dynamic.
Definitely food for thought. Okay, back to more grounded reality. People are using this for serious practical stuff too, like project migrations. You mentioned Laravel, PHP, and MySQL example. That sounds like a painful task, usually.
Oh, notoriously painful.
Yeah.
But Claude apparently handled a lot of the heavy lifting. It generated documentation, figured out dependencies, including obscure ones like Cloudflare turnstile integration. It set up the app, helped debug database connection issues. Although the user did have to explicitly tell Claude, hey, you need to grant yourself admin permissions on the database.
Okay, so some guidance still needed.
A little bit, yeah. And it helped migrate the email sending service, too.
Yeah.
The user estimated it saved them somewhere between 16 and 32 hours compared to doing it all manually.
16 to 32 hours, that's huge.
It's massive. And just as importantly, they felt it dramatically accelerated their learning of the new tech stack they were migrating to.
That's a really good point. While saving 16 to 32 hours is fantastic, what about the potential pitfalls? Like if you're migrating a system you don't know well, even with Claude's help, could you miss something critical? Where is that human oversight still absolutely essential?
That's a super important question. The time saving is real, but yeah, human oversight is non-negotiable. You, the developer, still need to understand the implications of what Claude is doing, especially for things like security permissions or subtle business logic embedded in the old code. Claude might migrate the code correctly, but does it understand the why? Probably not as deeply as a human familiar with the system.
So it helps you learn faster, but doesn't replace fundamental understanding.
Exactly. And if the migration involves tricky architectural decisions or optimizing for performance in the new environment, that still requires your judgment and experience. Claude is an incredible accelerator and assistant, but you're still the architect and the final QA.
Okay, that clarifies the balance. What other kinds of interesting projects are emerging?
All sorts. Someone built a Hacker News comment ranker browser plugin. Apparently, the UI quality was surprisingly good, even adding things like a settings page without being explicitly asked. Another person built a simple poster maker tool, like a minimal Canva replacement, to combine images and text into PDFs. Claude showed good UI knowledge, but needed iteration to get the user experience right.
And it's not just for coding, right? Admin tasks.
Yeah, that was interesting. Automating things like renaming batches of bank statements based on their content, merging them into CSVs, even classifying expenses. It hints at how these tools could impact non-developer roles, too. Anyone dealing with lots of structured or semi-structured data.
Yeah.
Like bookkeepers, maybe?
Fascinating. And one user actually wrote the source article we're discussing using Claude Code. That's very meta.
It is. They talked about enjoying the flow mixing, regular writing, with instructing Claude to fix typos, reformat sections, or even generate little UI mockups within the writing process. They acknowledged the whole debate about AI writing, saying it's more like a powerful word calculator for summarizing or restructuring, but that real creative writing still needs heavy human prompting and direction. Still, using it as the editor is a cool concept.
It really is. This all feels like a pretty big shift. One source called it a 6 weeks of development revolution. That's a bold claim.
It is bold, but they backed it up with this great analogy. Claude Code is like the invention of photography for art.
How so?
Before photography, creating a realistic scene took immense time and skill. Photography lets you capture the scene almost instantly, and then the artistry comes in the composition, the editing, the refinement. They argue Claude Code lets developers generate entire scenes instantly, large chunks of functionality, and then the developer's skill shifts more towards refinement, integration, code review.
That's a powerful way to think about it.
Yeah, and this user said this shift allowed them to clear years of accumulated technical debt in just weeks. Tasks that felt like a huge burden before suddenly became manageable.
And prototyping gets faster. External data.
Designers getting working prototypes in hours, not days or weeks. Pulling in context directly from Google Drive, Figma, Slack, using that MCP protocol. Even integrating Claude into CI/CD pipelines using GitHub Actions.
How does that work? CI/CD integration.
You can set it up so that if a build fails or maybe on a pull request, you can just mention @Claude in a comment, give it instructions like fix the failing tests or address these review comments, and it will attempt to make the changes and push a new commit.
Automated code review and fixes.
Wow, yeah, it's moving towards that. There's also an SDK and hooks for building even more custom AI assistants or controlling Claude's lifecycle programmatically.
So it sounds like getting these revolutionary results isn't just about knowing the commands, but really adopting a certain mindset as a developer.
Absolutely. It comes back to clear communication. Having a good spec.md file outlining the high-level goals helps, and that detailed Claude.md for the project specifics. Asking Claude to review its own code is a surprisingly effective technique, too. Okay, you wrote this function, now critique it. What could be improved? Are there edge cases missed? Turning it back on itself. Right. And many are creating these personal global agent guides in their Claude.md, defining their core principles like always aim for incremental progress, be pragmatic, explain your intent clearly, defining standard processes like always plan first, use TDD for new features, if stuck after 3 attempts, ask for help, setting technical standards, decision frameworks. It's like defining the operating manual for your AI partner.
But you're still ultimately responsible.
100%. That cannot be stressed enough. You own the code that gets committed. Manual review, thorough testing, especially for AI-generated code, are absolutely essential. It's a tool, a powerful one, but accountability stays with the human.
It seems like this process, this need for clear specs and plans, might actually make people better developers, more thoughtful.
That's one of those interesting side effects people are reporting. It can act as a true collaborative design partner, but you have to engage it correctly.
Meaning?
Just typing a big task description and hitting enter often fails, especially for complex things. The conversation context gets filled up, or later instructions override earlier ones. The better approach is to ask Claude to write a plan document first, a detailed markdown file outlining the steps, the approach, potential issues.
Okay, like we discussed in workflows.
Exactly. But making that plan the central artifact. You review and approve the plan. Then, crucially, you can clear the chat history and start the implementation phase with only the plan document as context.
Ah, so the plan becomes the stable source of truth.
Precisely. And Claude, working from the plan, acts like a junior colleague. It might question parts of the plan as it tries to implement them, uncovering issues you hadn't thought of.
And the plan evolves.
Yes. You instruct Claude. As you implement, If you deviate from this plan or discover something new, you must update the plan document. It becomes a living document, a quality check throughout the process. This solves the context limit problem because you can always restart with just the latest plan. And users say it forces them to think more architecturally, document more thoroughly, and reason more clearly about their designs. It elevates their own process.
That's a profound impact. So wrapping up, we've seen Claude Code isn't just, another tool in the box. It's this flexible, customizable agent.
Yeah, deeply integrated. It can be that tireless assistant, that knowledgeable guide for exploring code bases, even that collaborative design partner forcing you to think harder.
From making setup easier with Claude.md to tackling huge migrations, speeding up prototyping, even automating boring admin stuff, it really feels aimed at making development more efficient, maybe more accessible.
It really does feel like a paradigm shift is happening. That photography analogy resonates. Generating the initial scene quickly, then focusing your human expertise on the refinement, the integration, the critical thinking.
It definitely demands more from you in terms of clear communication, specific instructions, active collaboration.
Right, it's not magic, but the payoff seems huge. Faster delivery, less technical debt bogging you down, and maybe, just maybe, a more thoughtful way of designing software.
So the final thought for you listening. If a tool like Claude Code could take away the mundane, automate the repetitive, maybe even sharpen your own architectural thinking, what could that unlock for you? What ambitious projects have maybe been sitting on your back burner waiting for you to have more time or more expertise? Maybe the real revolution here isn't just coding faster, but opening up entirely new possibilities for what you can build and achieve.